Picture this. You are 36 years old, standing in the parking lot of a hospital at 7 in the morning, still in your coat from the night before, holding a piece of paper with 3 words on it that are about to split your life clean in 2. Not the words you feared, not a diagnosis. 3 words you had stopped letting yourself want so badly. It had become a kind of grief in itself. And before you can even sit down, before you can call anyone, before you can figure out what your face is doing, your phone rings. And it is your husband. And something in his voice tells you, before he says a single thing, that the life you had been holding together for 9 years has just decided to stop holding back. That was Cecily Hart's morning. That was where everything ended. And, though she could not have known it then, where everything real finally began. Cecily had married Gordon Hart at 27, the kind of age where you still believe that love is mostly about choosing the right person, and then the rest arranges itself. Gordon came from a family with a name that opened doors in their small Connecticut city. His mother, Rhonda, wore the family reputation like a second coat, always on, always visible, always slightly too warm for the room. She had welcomed Cecily at the engagement dinner with a smile that said, "Welcome," and eyes that said, "Let us see how long you last for 9 years." Cecily lasted. She cooked Sunday dinners that Rhonda critiqued with the precision of a woman who had been practicing. She attended holiday gatherings where Gordon's sister, Bryn, made comments designed to sound like jokes. "Oh, Cecily, you must be so patient, waiting all this time. Some people just aren't built for it, I suppose." She smiled when she said it. She always smiled. Cecily had learned to smile back and say nothing, and then go stand in the kitchen for a few minutes, pretending to check on something that did not need checking. The thing they were all waiting for, the thing Rhonda made sure was never far from the surface of any conversation, was a child. An heir, she called it once, actually said the word, as if they were a dynasty rather than a family in a colonial-style house in Fairfield County. Every year without a pregnancy was another year Rhonda found ways to make Cecily feel like a project that was behind schedule. They had tried everything. 3 rounds of IUI, then IVF twice. Each attempt felt like handing your heart to a stranger and asking them to be careful. The second IVF failure, Cecily had sat in her car, in the fertility clinic parking lot for 40 minutes without moving. She was not crying. She had cried so much by then that something in her had simply gone quiet, the way a room goes quiet when everyone has finally stopped trying to talk over each other. Gordon drove home without speaking. She watched the trees go past the window and thought about nothing and everything at once. When the doctors finally sat them down and said gently that further IVF cycles were unlikely to produce a different result, Cecily heard the words and felt them settle into her like cold water. She looked at Gordon's face and saw something she did not want to name, relief. Just a flicker of it, quickly hidden, but she had known his face for 9 years. She had seen every version of it. And she knew what she saw. She stayed because she had promised to. Because she still believed, in that stubborn, quiet part of herself she could not seem to argue away, that the story was not finished yet. About 2 months before everything changed, Cecily's longtime gynecologist referred her to a specialist at a practice across town. Dr. Alden Merritt was thorough in a way that felt different from the other doctors she had seen. Unhurried, listening, asking questions the others had not thought to ask. When he reviewed her complete history, something in her file caught his attention. The chronic pelvic pressure she had described since her early 20s, written off as normal. The way her cycles had always been brutal and irregular, chalked up to stress. The implantation failures that no one had ever looked beneath. He ordered a new round of imaging. The results came back clear and devastating in the same breath. Stage 2 endometriosis, undiagnosed, silently undermining every procedure, every cycle, every hopeful 2-week wait for nearly a decade. A condition affecting roughly 1 in 10 women, taking an average of 7 to 10 years to diagnose because the pain is so routinely dismissed. Because so many women are told that difficult periods are just something you learn to live with. This was never a question of your body failing, Dr. Merritt told her. It was a question of the right information never being found. He outlined a treatment plan. Surgery first, to address the disease at the source, followed by a targeted protocol to support natural conception. He was careful and honest, and did not make promises. But he said there was real reason for hope, and the way he said it, without performance, without the slightly too bright optimism, she had learned to distrust. She believed him. Cecily did not tell Gordon. She had learned by then to carry hope privately. It was safer that way. Less to lose if it went wrong. She followed every instruction, went to every follow-up, let herself want it again in the careful, guarded way of someone who has been burned enough times to know that hope is not the same thing as certainty. But she let herself want it. That felt like enough for now. Several weeks later, on a Thursday morning in November, Dr. Merritt's office called. Could she come in that afternoon? She went alone. She sat in the chair across from him, and he looked at her results, and then looked at her and said, "Cecily, you are pregnant." She did not move for a moment. The words sat in the air between them like something that needed to be confirmed by more than just sound. Pregnant. After 9 years, after everything, after being told, gently and with great professional care, that it was simply not going to happen for her. She walked to her car and sat in the driver's seat and put both hands on the steering wheel and breathed. She was going to go home and tell Gordon. She had already built the moment in her mind on the drive over, the look on his face, the shift in the room, the long exhale of 9 years finally letting go. Her phone rang before she reached the highway. "Gordon." She answered. He was at the house, he said. He needed to talk to her. His voice had the quality of someone who has already decided something and is calling not to discuss it but to deliver it. She drove home with both hands on the wheel and the news still warm inside her chest. The suitcase was by the front door, not hers, but the meaning was the same. Gordon was in the kitchen, and the woman leaning against the counter, coffee in hand, already comfortable in Cecily's kitchen, in the way only someone who had been there many times would be, was named Tara Solano. Cecily knew the name. She had told herself not to trust the knowing. Rhonda was there too, of course, standing just inside the doorway to the hall, arms folded, wearing the expression of a woman who has been waiting a long time for a meeting to finally be called to order. Gordon told her it was over. He used words like growing apart and different futures, and I think we both know. He said this while Tara stood 3 feet away and Rhonda nodded slowly in the background, like a judge rendering a verdict she had composed years ago. Cecily's hand went to her stomach, not visibly, just her fingers, pressing gently against the fabric of her coat. She thought about what she was holding, what was already, quietly, impossibly growing. She thought about saying it. "Gordon, wait, there is something you do not know yet." But she looked at his face and then at Rhonda's face and understood, with sudden and complete clarity, that there was no version of this room that deserved that news. That what she was carrying was not a bargaining chip. It was not a reason to stay somewhere she was no longer wanted. It was hers. She picked up her keys from the counter. She said, "All right," and nothing else. She walked out. She drove for 20 minutes without knowing where she was going. Eventually, she pulled into the parking lot of a small park near the edge of town, the kind of place that is never crowded on weekday afternoons, and she sat and watched bare November trees and tried to understand what had just happened to her life. She was 36. She was pregnant. She had no idea what came next. She was still sitting there when a silver sedan pulled into the lot and parked 2 spaces over. An older man got out, white-haired, unhurried in the way of someone accustomed to making their own pace. He walked toward the park and then stopped, looked at her car, looked at her through the window with the directness of someone who sees something and doesn't look away from it. He knocked gently on the glass. She rolled the window down. "Are you all right?" he asked, not in the way people ask when they want you to say yes so they can keep walking. He asked it the way a person asks when they are prepared to hear the actual answer. She was not expecting kindness just then. She had not been expecting it for quite some time. Something about the unexpectedness of it made her eyes fill before she could stop them. She told him she was fine. He waited. She told him she was not fine. He nodded and leaned against the door of her car, not impatient, not checking anything, simply present. She told him almost everything, not in order, not coherently, but he followed it without interrupting, without offering solutions, without making the small wincing expressions people make when they are more uncomfortable than you are. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I live 10 minutes from here. My housekeeper makes soup on Thursdays and there is always far too much of it. You should eat something." It was such an ordinary thing to say. She almost laughed. She did, a little, the kind that catches you off guard. "My name is Bernard," he said. "Bernard Halcott." She told him her name. He opened the door of her car for her, the way a person does when they are not performing courtesy, but simply practicing it, and she got out and followed him. His home was not what she expected, which was perhaps foolish, given that she had no reason to expect anything. It was large and warm and filled with the quiet of a house that had been lived in for a long time. Books stacked in deliberate towers, photographs crowding a hallway table, a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and something simmering. A woman named Iris appeared briefly, set 2 bowls on the table without ceremony, and disappeared. Bernard sat across from Cecelia and they ate soup, and he asked her about her work. And she told him she was an architect, had been with a firm in New Haven for 8 years, had designed 3 municipal libraries and a waterfront community center that she was privately proud of. He listened. He asked real questions, not polite ones. She was halfway through her bowl before she realized her hands had stopped shaking. She stayed 3 hours. When she finally stood to leave, he walked her to the door and said, without preamble, "The spare room is on the 2nd floor. It has its own bathroom. You are welcome to it for as long as you need. It isn't charity. It is what people are supposed to do for each other." She looked at him for a moment. "Why?" she said. He considered this. "Because you reminded me of someone," he said, "and I am still working out who. I will figure it out eventually." She took the room. She told herself it was temporary. 3 days, a week at most, while she sorted out the practicalities of a life being reorganized from the foundation up. She found a lawyer. She filed the paperwork. She arranged to collect her things from the house while Gordon was at work, Rhonda pointedly absent for once, and she started to settle slowly into Bernard's quiet house. He was 71, a retired civil engineer who had built bridges in 4 states and 2 countries. He had a daughter who lived in Seattle and called every Sunday. He read actual newspapers and had opinions about them. He made coffee at 6 in the morning and left a cup outside her door without knocking, which she found inexplicably one of the kindest things anyone had ever done for her. She was in the study one evening, looking for a pen, when she opened the wrong drawer and found a folder of old photographs. She almost closed it. Something made her look. The photo on top was taken outdoors, summer light, 2 men in their 30s standing in front of what looked like a construction site. One was clearly a younger Bernard, barely recognizable but for the posture. The other man she recognized immediately and absolutely, the way you recognize something that has been part of you since before you had words for it. Her father, Thomas Hart, not Gordon's father, her own. Thomas Hart, who had died when she was 22, the year before she met Gordon. The absence she had carried into her marriage, like a piece of furniture she'd arranged her whole life around. Her hands went completely still. Bernard was in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. She held up the photograph. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a sound. "Who is that, the man beside you?" Bernard looked at the photo. Something moved across his face. "Tommy," he said, and then stopped. "Thomas Hart. We worked together for 15 years. Built 6 projects along the eastern seaboard together. He was the best structural engineer I ever knew, and the best friend I ever had. He passed away 14 years ago. I looked for his family afterward. I never found them." She said very quietly, "That is my father." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something that neither of them had language for yet. Bernard looked at her face for a long moment. Then something shifted behind his eyes, the particular expression of a person watching scattered pieces suddenly, irrevocably arrange themselves into something they should have recognized long ago. "Of course," he said. "Of course it's you." He sat down in the chair, nearest to him, heavily, like his legs had made the decision without consulting him. She sat across from him, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the room held them there while they caught up to what had happened. He told her about her father, things she had known and things she had not. The way Thomas would work through lunch and not notice. The time he drove 4 hours in the wrong direction to help Bernard through a situation he has never stopped being grateful for. How he had talked about his daughter, the girl who used to fall asleep on his blueprints as a toddler and who was going to do something remarkable with her life. He was certain of it. She told him things she had not told anyone in years. The way it had felt, losing him at 22. The particular shape of grief when you lose a parent young, before you have become entirely yourself, before you have had the chance to know each other as adults. Bernard listened. He did not try to fill the silences. He understood, she realized, the weight of the same absence. They talked until past midnight. When she finally said goodnight and climbed the stairs, she felt, for the first time in a very long time, like she was in a place that had been expecting her. In the weeks that followed, the house changed. Not physically, but the quality of the air in it was different. Bernard started leaving architectural journals on the kitchen table. She started making dinner on the nights Iris was off. He had strong opinions about structural integrity, and even stronger ones about the direction of urban planning in New England, and she found herself arguing with him, comfortably, the way she had argued with her father. And then there was Dr. Alden Merritt, who had not disappeared from her life, simply because the clinical phase of their relationship was complete. She was still his patient. He still called to check in on her progress, which he explained more than once was professionally appropriate given the complexity of her case. She was aware that he called more often than was strictly necessary. He was 39. He had been in practice for a decade. He was serious in the way of someone who became serious, not because life made him grave, but because he had simply always been that way. Careful with people, careful with words, careful with the particular vulnerability of someone who comes to you when they have nowhere else to turn. He came to Bernard's house once to return a book Bernard had lent him, which was how she discovered they knew each other. Bernard explained it simply. He had been Alden's mentor years ago, had hired him as a project intern when he was 20, and decided within a week that the kid was going to be extraordinary at whatever he chose to do. They had stayed close. Of course, Bernard said, over dinner the following week, with the mild satisfaction of a man watching something confirm itself. Of course you two have met. She looked at him across the table. He looked back serene and entirely too pleased with himself. She said, Bernard. He said, yes. She said, you knew he was my doctor. He said, I knew the clinic. I did not arrange anything. And that is the truth. Fate has a better sense of timing than I do. She looked at Alden. He looked at her. He said, for what it's worth, I did not know you were Thomas Hart's daughter until last week. She said, that doesn't answer anything. He said, no, probably not. She laughed, unexpected and real. He looked at her when she laughed in a way she noticed and chose, for the moment, not to examine too closely. The months that followed were the kind of months she had not let herself imagine, since she was young enough to believe that things could simply be good without requiring constant vigilance. Bernard came to every ultrasound. He sat in the waiting room with a newspaper, and always stood up when she came out, and searched her face before he did anything else. And she appreciated this more than she ever found words for. Alden was her doctor. He was also slowly, inevitably, in the way of things that become undeniable through accumulation rather than declaration, something else. Evenings that started professionally and ended with conversation that had no particular destination. A habit of texting her links to architectural reviews that reminded him of projects she had described. A morning when she mentioned she had not slept well, and he showed up at 11 with a coffee from the good place 2 towns over, completely unnecessarily, and she did not send him away. One evening in early spring, she was sitting on the back porch while Bernard was inside, and Alden sat down beside her without being invited, which was something he had stopped needing to be by then, and they watched the yard go quiet in the particular way it does just after dusk. He said, I need to tell you something. She said, all right. He said, I have been trying to be careful with the way I feel about you, because you have been through enough, and the last thing I wanted to do was be another thing that asked something of you before you were ready. She was quiet. He said, I am not asking for anything. I just want you to know that I am here, that I am not going anywhere. That when you are ready for something, I hope you will consider the possibility that it might be this. She looked at him for a long time. Then she reached out and covered his hand with hers. They stayed like that until the stars came out, which, in early spring in Connecticut, takes a while. On a Wednesday morning in July, at the hospital where Alden had practicing privileges, Cecily gave birth to 2 girls, Hazel and June. Bernard was in the waiting room and cried in the way of someone who has not done it much and finds it arrives without warning. When the nurse brought the babies out, he held Hazel for a very long time without speaking, and Cecily watched him and thought about her father and the 41 years of friendship that had made this particular moment possible, and the strange, careful mercy of the way things find their way to where they belong. 6 months later, a text message arrived from Gordon. "Tara is having a baby shower next weekend. Thought you should know we moved on just fine. Hope you did too." It was small and mean and very precisely designed to land where it would do the most damage. She recognized the architecture of it immediately. Rhonda almost certainly had suggested the phrasing. She showed it to Alden. He read it once, set the phone down. He said, "He is a man trying to throw a stone across a distance he doesn't understand." She said, "He wants me to feel left behind." Alden said, "The only way he could make you feel left behind is if you believed you were still in the same race, and you have been somewhere else entirely for quite some time." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to go to the shower." He looked at her. She said, "Not to perform anything, not to wound anyone. I just want them to see. I think I have earned the right to be seen," he said. "Then we go." She called Bernard that evening. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a silence. Then he said, "Your father would have driven you there himself. He would have told you to wear something that makes you feel like yourself. And then he would have waited in the car and had opinions about everything he could see through the window." She laughed, the full kind. Bernard said, "I am a little old to wait in a car, but I happen to know someone with a very nice boat." The morning of Tara's baby shower, Cecily got Hazel and June dressed in small yellow sundresses while they made their professional opinions about the process known at some volume. Alden watched from the doorway. He had this habit of watching her with the girls in a way she had learned to notice and no longer looked away from. Bernard had called in something she still was not entirely clear on, but a water taxi pulled up to the dock at the edge of his property at 10 in the morning, low and white and quiet, the kind of boat that announces nothing, except that whoever is aboard has ceased to concern themselves with announcement. They arrived by water. It was Connecticut. There was a dock. The shower was at a venue with a lawn that met the Long Island Sound. She stepped off first. She was wearing the kind of dress that is simple enough to wear anywhere, and striking enough that people notice it anyway. She was carrying June, who was surveying the lawn with the thorough, unimpressed expression of a 7-month-old encountering a new environment. Hazel was in Alden's arms, already reaching for his collar with the focused intentionality she applied to all objects of interest. The whispers happened before she had fully crossed the lawn. She did not look around for Gordon. She did not look for Rhonda. She went to the gift table and placed the box she had brought and turned around, and he was standing 10 feet away. He looked at her, and then at the babies, and something in his face moved in a direction that was not simple or easy or quick to finish. He said her name. She said, "Hello, Gordon." His eyes went to Hazel in Alden's arms, and then to June in hers, and then back to Cecily's face with the slow comprehension of a man counting backward through events he had not been present for. "You have twins," he said. He said it the way you say something when your brain has confirmed it and the rest of you has not caught up. She said yes. He said, "The doctors told us it was impossible." She said, "The doctors were working with incomplete information. Dr. Merritt found what the others had missed. I had endometriosis, undiagnosed, working against every procedure we ever tried. Every round of IVF failed because no one ever looked past the surface. Once it was properly treated, the rest happened as it was supposed to." She let him absorb that. Then she said, "Gordon, on the morning you called me to come home and told me it was over, I was sitting in a parking lot. I had just come from the clinic. I was on my way home to tell you something we had spent 9 years trying to hear." She watched his face. She said, "I was pregnant that morning. I had been pregnant since before you made your decision. I walked into that house carrying our daughters, and I looked at you and at Tara and at your mother, and I understood that there was no version of that room that deserved what I was holding. So I walked out. That was my choice, and I do not regret it." He opened his mouth. She said, "I am not telling you this to hurt you. I am telling you because you are a person who will spend time wondering what happened, and you deserve to know exactly what happened." Rhonda was at the edge of her vision. She could see, without looking directly, the particular stillness of a woman who has been certain of something for a very long time, and has just been handed information that dismantles the certainty quietly and completely. Tara appeared beside Gordon. She looked at Cecily, and then at Alden and at the two babies, and something honest moved across her face. Not guilt exactly, something older than guilt, the expression of a person who knows, and has known for a while, that the story they participated in was not the whole story. She said, "Cecily, I am sorry. I knew the situation wasn't as straightforward as I was told. I should have asked more questions before I said yes to any of it." Cecily looked at her for a moment. She said, "I believe you." She meant it. She had no room left for anything that was not the truth. She turned back to Gordon one last time. He was still looking at the babies with the expression of a man standing in the middle of something he cannot change and cannot stop understanding. She said, "I hope this works out for you. I mean that." And she did. She turned and walked back to Alden, who had been standing a steady, quiet distance away. Watching her with the particular expression she had come to understand meant he was in the middle of being proud of someone, and trying not to show it too aggressively. He said nothing. He took June from her arms, so she was holding both girls, one in each arm, and put his free hand at the small of her back. They walked back to the dock. Bernard married them in October. Technically not, but he orchestrated the thing so completely that the distinction felt pedantic. The ceremony was at his house, in the backyard. 30 people who had earned the right to be there. Alden's mother flew in from Portland and cried through the entire thing, with the open, cheerful abandon of a woman who does not believe in composure when something genuinely good is happening. A judge who owed Bernard a favor officiated. Bernard sat in the front row. He had worn his good suit, and he was not going to pretend he wasn't going to cry, and didn't bother trying. When Cecily appeared in the doorway, Alden went very still in the way of someone receiving information. Their whole system needs a moment to process. She walked toward him, looking at his face, and not performing anything for anyone else in the room. And he looked back at her the same way, and everyone present understood that what they were watching was not a ceremony, but a confirmation of something that had already been decided some time ago. The vows were their own. Short, direct, the way her father had always communicated, and she had learned to value. "I see you. I am choosing you. I intend to keep doing that." Afterward, in the kitchen while the party continued outside, Bernard found her and handed her a glass of champagne and did not say anything for a moment. Then he said Tommy would have liked him. He would have had a great many opinions about Alden's taste in cars, and absolutely zero complaints about the rest. She said, "He would have driven you both crazy analyzing the structural integrity of this house at your own dinner table." Bernard said, "He did that the first time I brought him here. Told me the load-bearing walls in the addition were undersized. He was right." She laughed, and he looked at her, while she laughed with the same expression she had seen in the photograph. The younger man standing in summer light next to her father, both of them unsuspecting. Both of them standing on the edge of a decades-long friendship they had no idea they were beginning. She thought about what it meant, that this man had known her father when her father was the age she was now. That somewhere in the geometry of two men's long friendship, there had always been a line that led, eventually, to her. She did not believe in things being arranged. She believed in people making choices, thousands of small choices, that accumulated over time into something that looked, from a certain angle, like it had been planned. Her father had chosen Bernard. Bernard had chosen to stop in a parking lot on a November Thursday. Alden had chosen to look at her file more carefully than anyone before him. She had chosen to walk out of that house without begging to be wanted. All of those choices, stacked one on top of another, had brought her here. She went back outside. Hazel and June were on a blanket in the grass, surrounded by people who loved them and were not shy about demonstrating it. Alden was crouched down between them, making the specific face adults make when they are completely at the mercy of small children and don't mind at all. Hazel was pulling his tie toward her with scientific focus. June had decided the grass was more interesting than the people, and was conducting a thorough investigation. Cecily stood in the doorway and watched them and felt, underneath the champagne and the October light, and the sound of people she loved talking over each other, something very simple and very complete. The particular fullness of a life that fits the person living it. She had been told, in 100 different ways and by 100 different silences, that she was asking for too much, that she should be grateful for what she had, that wanting more was a kind of ingratitude. She looked at her daughters on the grass, and the man who had not stopped showing up for her, and the old man across the yard who had her father's laugh in his memory, and 41 years of friendship to thank for everything. She had not asked for too much. She had simply finally arrived somewhere that was enough.